Good evening. Good evening and welcome. It's really wonderful to see you all here and to what I think promises to be a wonderful couple of days tonight and tomorrow. This great conference, Rethinking Pei, a Centenary Symposium. Many of you probably know that a few months ago we had a celebration here to really have a birthday celebration, which was to celebrate IM's 100th birthday. And it was fantastic during that event to also know that IM was watching the birthday celebrations live, and I know that he's doing that again tonight, or hopefully he's doing that tonight. And last time, as we were going on during the evening, I was also getting some photographs of IM at home having dinner and watching us. So if you're watching us, IM, it's really wonderful that you're with us, and hope that you will enjoy the evening and don't disagree with too many of the speakers. At that point, we'd already made the decision in collaboration with our colleagues at M+ and the architecture curator there, Eric Chen, and our collaborators also at Hong Kong U, Cole Roscom, and others, that we were going to do two events, one here in Cambridge and one event that would be in Hong Kong. And this is the first of the two events. The other one will take place in Hong Kong in the middle of December. So I hope that you'll also be able to join us there if you are able to. It would be fantastic to have you there. I think everyone knows that we are so delighted and honored that to have Im Pei as one of the graduates of the school. I think we know that he graduated from the GSD in 1946. And soon afterwards became an assistant professor here at the school and taught for an additional 2 years before he left and set up his practice. His wife Eileen graduated from the GSD in 1944. His son Didi is an Pei-MArch graduate from 1972, and Sandi, who's here and sitting in the front row, graduated in 1976. We were lucky at the last event to have Didi as one of the panelists, and I think it's wonderful that Sandi is able to join us here tonight for this particular discussion. The work of Im Pei is obviously exists in many parts of the world. He really has been a global architect par excellence, working with government leaders, major cities, major institutions, to work on a number of significant projects around the world. And of course, the city of Boston also has been the recipient of a number of significant projects from IM and the practice. They include the Government Center here, which is going to be the subject of one of the papers by Danny Abramson tomorrow. The JFK Library, which is the subject of Ed Eigen's paper. An ensemble of buildings at MIT that Bill Leslie will cover. And of course, other projects include the Christian Science Center, Harbor Towers, housing, and the MFA's West Wing. In addition to these, of course, there are many projects in other places, including, since we're going to be in Hong Kong, the Bank of China in Hong Kong, and of course, projects in different parts of China as well as Taiwan. I think in terms of the reason why we felt so strongly, and here I want to recognize one of our own faculty, Seng Kwon, who has worked very closely with Cole and with Eric on the conference, is really the fact that Im Pei has been in some ways quite reticent to be the subject of a lot of studies, of investigation related to his architecture. And he has probably at times spent, been more involved with government agencies, governments, leadership of countries, and really thinking in a much larger way about the role and status of the architect in society than to be too involved with the academy. And I think in part this conference is trying to remedy that and to put the work of Im Pei at the center of research and investigation. And I'm really grateful to all of our speakers for being here and for agreeing to really delve into the work of Im Pei in a way that I hope will pave the way towards, much more sort of significant contributions as you begin to develop your papers, and hopefully the exhibition that will happen at M+ and other publications come out. Harry Cobb, who sadly is not with us tonight, gave a wonderful talk when we had the birthday celebration, which was really amazing and covered many, many topics. But I think it's very important that we recognize the contribution of Im Pei and his partners to innovations in the formation of architectural practice, which is really the subject of our conversation tonight, on the role of the architect as a kind of global citizen, on the topic of advancements in building technology. Specifically, those of you who were here, you heard Harry Cobb talk about concrete, and he talked about concrete many times. It was really important to know how emphatic Harry was, so I'm really sorry that he's not here to hear people talk about concrete tomorrow. But also, I think they were, of course, a practice that had someone who really focused very much on the technology of construction, with Mike Flynn being an important part of the practice. The question of engagement with the city, the connection with the arts, these are all topics that I think IM and his partners have really focused on. And so I think it would be really great if at the end of this conference and the conference in Hong Kong, we feel we have really then discovered, we have now have a different body of work in relation to the contribution of Im Pei. I want to thank the Sea Foundation, whose support has made this conference or this series of conferences possible. Of course, the Pei family, Didi and Sandi, and by extension, Harry Cobb and all the other partners at Pei Cobb Fried. Many of whom we are very proud that many of them are GSD graduates. I want to thank the Department of Architecture at Hong Kong University, Cole, who I mentioned before, Cole Roscom, who is actually a Harvard graduate from across the road. He did his PhD in history of art and architecture in 2010, and the current professor chair at the university, Nasrin Saraji, who I also feel lucky that I've known her for a long time. And as I said, of course, all the other participants, including those who were here for the last roundtable, Bart Vorsanger, Karen Van Langen, Didi that I mentioned, Calvin Sao, who's here with us, Leslie Robertson, and his partner Sotin, who are with us. And I'm also very excited that Leslie's book has just been published, and recommend that to all of you. And of course, I'm very grateful to all the GSD faculty who have participated or will participate in these events. Those include Scott Cohen from the last roundtable, Grace Law, who will be leading the panel discussions tonight, Eric Howler, Michael Hayes, Seng Kwan, Melanie Park, and Ed Eigen. So thank you all very much, and really thanks again to all of you for being here. Please welcome Professor Grace Law, who will make the introductions for the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of our panelists to be here tonight. The title of this this talk, Emergence of a Modern Practice, is very broad. So I thought that I needed to frame something that we could push against in our conversation to debate tonight. So with that, maybe I'd have the lights come down. When we think of the first modern practices in North America, there are some icons which come to mind. McKim, Mead and White, Daniel Burnham, and Holabird and Root, and these offices were known for their prolific work. We see that the practice of architecture is structured in partnerships of named principles, each with specific roles. Perhaps most widely known is McKim, Mead and White. Author Mosette Broderick, in a 2011 interview on NPR, stated that all were born a half generation before the Civil War, all were of intellectual but modest backgrounds, and all had personalities sufficiently flawed to make their destiny seem a surprise. Perhaps it's even true that none was for long a talented designer. It was the synthesis of their association and their lifelong loyalty to one another that made this firm almost the brand name of architecture in turn of the century America. So in biographical accounts of their roles and personalities, they formed a triumvirate, and McKim was the mind of the office, the strategist or the expert. Mead was the heart of the office, running the office. He referred to himself as the rudder of the ship. And White was the front man, the rainmaker, the schmoozer, and infamously murdered for a supposed affair. So the organization of their office was also quite notable, and the plan's very small, but it's very interesting. Featured in Brick Builder in the 1913 article titled "The Business Side of an Architect's Office," the article illuminates the firm's practice and service model, and essentially the professional environment stating that the skilled man at the telephone switchboard can place an outsider in individual conversation with a member of the firm. But I think what this does is it tells you, it shows us about this sort of open office environment, the drafting room, which foregrounds architecture as a collaborative enterprise. Expertise in building type, in McKim, Mead and White's case, luxury houses at one scale and civic buildings at the other scale. And in total, the firm is credited with more than 900 buildings, all before AutoCAD, Rhino, Grasshopper, or BIM. So taken with the idea that they would bring the style of Europe to America, their work, for example, on college campuses was highly repetitive, very similar, often symmetrical facades and quadrangles with the tweaking of interior plans, which would assist in producing this sheer volume of the work and this expertise in type. McKim, Mead and White work with the Beaux-Arts elevation on difficult urban sites and adjust these elevations with very little anxiety. This is part of their architectural aesthetic, produced work from essentially a kit of parts and adapted to bespoke conditions with relative ease. So here again, the emphasis is on the aesthetic quality, the stability of the wrapper in which the rules of the geometric game opportunistically and malleably are applied to fit a trapezoidal site. So in terms of the firm's trajectory, not only did they look to Europe to design inspiration, but also as early as 1883, the architects desired to practice globally. Led by Charles McKim, the idea of the American Academy in Rome was born, and later, portions of their campus designed by McKim. So while this is actually not a lecture on McKim, Mead and White, it is interesting to use their firm as a foil to define characteristics of a modern practice. And I would offer four very simple ones. First, the idea of a partnership model, leveraging complementary skill sets of its principles within a corporate organizational structure in which there are defined roles and responsibilities. And it's interesting to note that McKim, Mead and White grew to 110 employees by 1891. The second is that there's expertise in type, achieved through repetition and volume of work, a combination of iconic projects and workaday civic buildings. Three, that there are aspirations for global international practice. And four, a commitment to an authorial voice, or let's call that a recognizable voice, which would be collaboratively undertaken. So to read McKim, Mead and White as a modern practice is to ask how have agencies of the architect emergent in 20th century practice transformed the conditions under which architecture is produced and perceived. In other words, under what guise is the architect an author? So fast forward today, and we see an advertisement from last week's New York Times Magazine showing 3 contemporary author architects, Raphael Vignoli, Richard Meyer, and Bill Pedersen, with us today. This question becomes contemporary with all of our guests here tonight, all of whom represent practice that we can identify as modern, and particularly also a deep interest in architecture as an aesthetic or representational discipline. So the image here presents the dilemma we hope to discuss, in part, how the modern architect, an authorial or aestheticized persona, manifests in the context of a larger corporate practice. And I make this distinction as there are as many flavors of corporate practice as there are architects in this room tonight. And as the anonymous corporate practice emerged in the mid-20th century, akin to firms, the acronym firms, Im Pei represents the dilemma facing the post-war production of architecture, namely the establishment of an aesthetic or authorial project in the self-critical and intellectual tradition that followed modernism, and yet at the same time subject to the efficiencies, pressures, and benefits of corporate organization. So we now turn our attention to the introduction of Im Pei, a graduate of the GSD, as Mohsen mentioned, in the time of Gropius. And this followed his undergraduate work at MIT, which at the time was steeped in the Beaux-Arts tradition, which is why he left that ship. And that links back to our conversation regarding McKim, Mead, and White. So as this past spring's birthday event, Harry Cobb shared with us some imagery of Im's thesis at Harvard. Pei was a student in Gropius's GSD, historically positioned in Bauhaus modernism and inheriting its modernist sensibility, and quite dazzled by Le Corbusier. Gropius is known to have commended Pei as a tremendous student, and notably, Pei's thesis was predictive of his aesthetic focus and significant as a prelude to a topology, the museum, which his office would later command. So in his early years, Pei works for the developer Webb and Knapp, and from 1948 to 1960, he is directly under the direction of William Zeckendorf, mostly working on housing. Pei describes Zeckendorf as one of the most imaginative land developers, if not the most imaginative. From Zeckendorf, he learned about the politics of building, by which he meant the ability to describe the value of an architectural proposal to stakeholders. Pei also remarked that he would not have been able to survive in Paris were it not for the fact that I had already encountered that kind of problem when I was with Zeckendorf. It is not very easy to sell an idea to a city or state, to demolish a large area in the center of the city and build something new. I learned that, and that helped me to develop patience and understanding for how a city and a society works and the power structure behind any major civic building. That was something I learned from Zeckendorf. And of course, Cobb said that with Zeckendorf, Pei was made a perennial student of concrete. So from this period, Im Pei launches Im Pei and Associates from 1955 to 66. And these are 2 of the first major commissions. And Pei's early work, I would say here, predicted an aesthetic project, a development or transformation of modernism. Now, this is 1955. Colin Rowe refers to the Mile High Center in his article Transparency 2, drafted the winter after its construction, saying, the building is presumably an exceptionally succinct statement of a phenomenal transparency. But to certain types of mind, the elegant post-Miesian achievement which it represents will suggest not only Chicago, but also Italy. It is apparent that the observer finds himself in the presence of an architectural tapestry whose warp and woof are immediately apparent to the eye, but whose invisible threads his organizing instinct mentally reconstructs. So it is interesting that it is an office tower because it is evidence of the highly aesthetic project Rowe describes, of which the Mannerist facade is perhaps the device, is now migrating into the domain of capital and exchange, of which the tall office building is the emblem. So here, there's a kind of also treatment of descriptive geometry on the right, which also suggests a highly rigorous interest in form and drawing, and again, a kind of condition of the 1950s avant-garde. And during this period, I.M. also receives one of his first overseas commissions. And this is a significant use of descriptive geometry, but also expertise in concrete to produce essentially a columnless, beamless, wall-less building. And here, glazed diamond-shaped tiles drape the exterior over a diagrid structure. And this is a remarkably contemporary form ahead of its time. And here, Harry Cobb, who's credited as the lead designer, creates the kind of Corbusian city of tomorrow in Miesian drag. These early tower projects established connections between a disciplinary history, Corbusier and Mies, and the newly available opportunity to build modernist office towers. So from 1966 to 89, Im Pei and Partners is established, acknowledging the change in organizational structure and the integration of partners. We see at this point a really strong sense for Pei's interest in abstraction, geometric form, and in this case, I am fascinated by the almost denial of scale. Scale is conveyed through the material itself and not in the markers through, for example, apertures. And this abstraction is realized further in the more mature project of the East Wing of the National Gallery. A project like this would not have succeeded without an aesthetic commitment, channeled, at least nominally, through an authorial voice. And here we see the treatment of the building as an iconic, abstract structure at the urban scale. And in recent conversation with Bill Pedersen, he reminded me that this building was created during the crucible of architecture's postmodernist phase. So this project took incredible commitment to realize in the face of postmodernism's ascendancy. But what makes Pei unique is the proximity between the political talent and charm and his aesthetic and disciplinary focus, the combination of which enables him to convince Jackie Kennedy to build a post-Cubist testament to her late husband's memory. We also see that the people in his practice during this period are developing their own voice. For example, the Christian Science Center by Araldo Kasuda, and the Hancock Tower, authored by Harry Cobb as lead designer. This project for its day shows the conflation of maybe Superstudio's continuous monument as an aesthetic or disciplinary polemic with the skyscraper and its connection to corporate office structures. So even more challenging is that all of this is in service of an argument about deference to a historic square, showcasing the work of H.H. Richardson and McKim, Mead, and White in the Boston Public Library. So a project like this exhibit the duality that Pei's office had begun to understand between the exigency of construction and corporate profit and the importance of representation or aesthetics. Given significant construction challenges and legal battles that followed, it also represents an incredible deftness in navigating public opinion, managing construction risk, and overcoming liability. The work of Pei and his partners, here in which Jim Freed is the lead designer, demonstrates strategic commitment to technology and structure, but always in service to a civic identity for the work. So the late 80s and early 90s projects of Pei Cobb Freed demonstrate the latitude of work available to Pei's practice, not only typologically varied, but also in terms of aesthetic focus. Cobb has said that the firm was held together by two central ideas. First, the shared belief in the pursuit of the craft of building, and second, to make an impact at the urban scale. The question the projects provoke is the dependence of this work on Pei for credibility, or can a practice move beyond its founders? Or must the unity of the work be bounded by aesthetic and disciplinary interests that Pei, or in this case any founder, develop over a lifetime career? At the time, projects like the Louvre might not have been completed by a boutique office. They rely on corporate organization to coordinate. But could anyone else have done something like the Louvre? Is Pei's practice unique in its ability to juxtapose corporate organization with artistic license? More broadly, as we turn attention to contemporary corporate practices, in what manner is an aesthetic boundary or intellectual project drawn by the principal architect? And how do architectural projects emerge from corporate practice, or from organizational structures in which there are multiple principles? From 1989 to the present, we see the named formation of a triumvirate that acknowledges Pei and his partners in the form of organization that it maintains today, about which we hope Yvonne will speak. And what we're going to do now is we're going to turn the podium over for some brief words from our panelists. We've asked each of them to share a few images of their work to orient us to their practice, and then we will dive into our conversation. Our first guest is Yvonne Seto, who joined Pei Cobb Fried and Partners in 1977 and became a partner in 1999. Over 4 decades of service, she has played a central role in advancing the firm's tradition of well-crafted public works, gaining national recognition as a designer of academic and cultural institutions, while extending the firm's global reach with major corporate projects in Europe, Asia, and Australia. Her diverse portfolio of built work illustrates her commitment to creating buildings that engender meaning and identity and serve their users. Her current practice is run by 8 partners in 1 location, New York City. Yvonne, please join us.
Thank you. Thanks, Grace. When I received the call from Mosen to participate in this roundtable, I was, with no hesitancy, I accepted because of the distinguished speakers that I was going to be in the company of. But little did I know that the title of the talk was going to be on the emergence of the modern practice, something that I had not expected. Not a type of lecture that you could throw up some really pretty pictures and be done with it. No, it really required a bit of thinking. So in doing that, I asked myself, what does our group practice today have anything to do with that title? Or what does our group practice from 60 years ago when Im Pei founded the practice have anything to do with that title? And so I started to think that because of my 40 years, maybe I really needed to look at the chronology of the firm, to look at its evolution. So I started by looking at, as Grace had started to talk about, the actual start of the firm as Im Pei and Associates, and going all the way to 2010 when the firm took on our current partners, the 3 new partners, and what does the firm, is the firm any different now? And as with all firms, the issue of continuity, the issue of name change, the issue of transition of leadership, we faced all those challenges. And so what I wanted to talk about a bit is about how it's not so much about the product that I want to show the product of our practice, but really the model of the practice. As I go, I wanted to talk about first in 1955, at the start of the practice, it was Im Pei and Associates. Informally a group practice, but it was still under the architectural division of Webb and Knapp. It was the developer Bill Seckendorf's firm. So it was loosely a group practice. It was not only until 1960 that IM felt that he wanted to separate from Webb and Knapp, and that he wanted to set up with 2 friends from Webb and Knapp, Harry Cobb and Ethan Leonard, to form a group practice. And it's that form of group practice that I wanted to talk about. What did these people who were friends, who really only wanted a partnership, a very private partnership in which they could have common goals? And what are the core beliefs of this particular model of practice? And I want to talk about 4, actually it happens to be 4 core beliefs. And have those beliefs endured, and are we still following those guidelines of those beliefs? And what was interesting was the idea of a partnership, of a group of people who would be working, a group of designers working in a studio environment, very much akin to an atelier, very similar to sort of the idea that some of these people came from GSD, came from the Bauhaus. It's the extension of the academy. coming into a studio environment where there is sort of this, some people call it a federation of autonomous vertical design studios, sort of brought together by shared beliefs, shared resources. It was a place where you could have a conversation about design. That was the start of the practice, and it was incredibly modern. And I was thinking about your title, modern in typology and very modern in its aesthetic. So by 1966, this idea of a modern aesthetic became gelled, and the Im Pei and Associates became Im Pei and Partners. And the three designers of the firm were elevated to the Academy of Arts and Letters. So it was interesting to us to see at that time that typology was extremely attractive to a lot of designers, and a lot of notable people flowed through the firm. For instance, our speaker, Bill Pedersen, Jim Polshek, Rick Franson, Predock, and also an artist like Sola Witt. So it was a practice that we closely follow, because we insist we're not a corporation. We are a set of partners interested in working together, sometimes collaboratively, sometimes not. So I want to point, oh, sorry, I did it wrong. So I wanted to point out that as it became Im Pei and Partners, the name change and the recognition of Harry and Jim came in 1989. I became a partner in 98. And the subsequent transition to now, we have 3 new partners, and I am happy to say 2 of them come from the GSD. This is Michael Bischoff and Jay Berman. So actually, proud to say that 50% of our partnership comes from here. So we follow that idea of that first core belief that we are a partnership, we practice as vertical design studios, autonomous. So we have now 6 design studios within our firm. And what are the other beliefs? The belief that the partners have always felt that they really wanted to have a diverse portfolio. Diverse portfolio diverse in scale, diverse in type, and diverse in its geography. So with that, well, they were a bit lucky in that they had a bit of all of those things when they started. They actually peeled off from Webb and Knapp as a staff of 100, if you can believe that. And they had done very large projects that were because of the planning and the urban renewal projects at that time. They also had academic work at MIT. They were really looking for smaller cultural significant projects. So in that sense, we closely follow that model today. It's very important for us to not be specializing on a market or a type. So I'm going to show you now. It was important because after talking to Grace, that what I'm going to show you, I was limited to 3 slides. So I wanted to talk about the firm, the model of the firm. I wanted to talk about our practice now, but not be talking about so much each product. It's not about a glossy picture of one project, but more about the portfolio, the diverse portfolio of recent projects done by the current partnership. So you can see here cultural projects, as museum in Charleston, a ballet school in Copenhagen, hospital work, and here really that focus of also another core belief of commitment to craft. A well-crafted building, not only on the inside, but also on the outside, and that the in-house expertise that we have for designing our own building enclosures. So that is a new idea for a oak wood glazed project for a hospital in New York City. the idea of having civic projects. This is in Milan. Tall office buildings, tall residential buildings, university buildings, as well as planning projects. So just a flavor of, we really try hard in this age of specialization to not be, to be diverse. And it's very difficult to compete, oftentimes, in that way. So you can see here, actually, this shows the work of many partners. And this goes to that fourth question, well, not fourth, but the idea of authorship, I think. I'm going to go to the next slide, which I wanted to show was really my own work. So how does a practice in a group practice, how does one's work get shown? And how does, so before I do that, I wanted to relay a quick story, because in 2009, I applied for fellowship for the AIA. And I had submitted my credentials to the AIA New York chapter, and I received comments. And it was interesting because it just so happens it was Toshiko who reviewed my portfolio. And she said to me, and I think she said something really important to me, and it helped me a lot. She said, you need in a group practice to show your own voice. Your own voice, authorial voice within this partnership. And I think to this day, I wanted to show you why that is important. And within my own work, I try to have a diverse portfolio. I try to do all the same things, crafting it well. So here I'm showing you really not a big glossy photo, but really, you know, normally you wouldn't want to show thumbnails like this. The museum project here, I would say I worked with IM on the Louvre Museum in Paris, but it didn't prepare me to work on NASCAR Hall of Fame. So it was really, I had to take notes from actually IM's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to do this project. And then museum renovation, academic projects in New York, vertical campuses at Fordham and CUNY. And for me, the interest in that vertical campus, what it means in urban cities. Also, I do have a great interest in office buildings. Now, you might find that kind of odd. But after starting with ABN AMRO in Amsterdam, I felt it was really interesting to actually, in the last few years, I've been working in different continents. And the idea of that office buildings have incredibly different office markets all over the world. And the idea of understanding that, understanding the different cultures of the workplace, understanding that green buildings are completely different in terms of how different countries have different rating systems. So for me, this was kind of, it's something that I want to do, and actually on my own time, this is a BREEAM excellent project, green building. This is a neighbor's 5-star green building. This is a LEED gold building, and this is a green building, China green building 3-star building. So my point is really, there's no uniformity in any of this. You want to practice as a practitioner to understand all of that, but it's something that I'm interested in exploring. So with that, I really wanted to say, just because the discussion here is about the model of a practice, and I think I want to say that it's important to our partners that our firm is small. It's 100 people. It is a small firm in character. It's very important, too, that we only have that fourth core belief. We only have one office. And it's always been, since IM started the firm, that we never wanted it to have multiple offices for fear of dilution of quality. And I think that is a really ripe discussion for other speakers, because other large firms for 4 times our size have multiple offices, 6 or 7 offices, and we have always sort of shied away from that. I mean, we are losing a lot of work. There's very clearly clients who really want you to be present. They want you to be hand-holding them. But I think we firmly believe and we want to persevere in that way. But I think it's really important that to hear from Bill and Shohei about the ideas in a global practice, that whether you have to have multiple offices. So I think I wanted to just kind of have those points. It's good for discussion.
Thank you, Yvonne. Okay, and we're, in the interest to make sure we have enough time for discussion, I had said 2 images. So everyone is stretched. It's just like architects. Okay. So as you know, our next guest is William Pedersen. In 1976, Bill Pedersen joined Gene Cohn and Sheldon Fox to found Cohn Pedersen Fox Architects. Previous to that, he graduated from the University of Minnesota and MIT. In 1975, he was awarded the Rome Prize in Architecture by a jury headed by Im Pei. And returning from Rome in 1967, in residence at a McKim building, he worked at Im Pei and Partners for 4 years, 3 of which were on the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. Since forming Cohn Pedersen Fox, 7 of Bill's buildings have been awarded National Design Awards from the AIA. And in 2013, the AIA of New York awarded him their Medal of Honor. Now, KPF is led by 25 principals with offices in 6 cities. Bill, please.
I don't need it right yet. Can I go back?
Oh, sure.
I'm delighted that Im is listening to us tonight, because I really haven't had an opportunity to tell him how much he's meant for my career. I first met Im in 1966. That was 51 years ago. I was interviewing with him in his office in New York shortly after they moved to 600 Madison Avenue. And I had just come from the Rome Prize. Coming into his office, immediately, the charm of Im and his warmth was evident. We sat down, we talked 15, 20 minutes. I was 28, he was 49. And after 20 minutes, Laisha Black, his assistant, came in. She said, Im, you have a meeting with the Academy of Arts and Letters in about 15 minutes. And Im said, oh, that's not important. Well, you can imagine what that made me feel like. I felt great. My last meeting with Im was at Les Robertson's book party last week. I went up to him and I said, Im, I worked with you on the National Gallery. And with a twinkle in his eye, he looked at me and he said, oh, that's not possible, you're too young. Again, I felt good, but for very different reasons. Yes, I did work with Im for 4 years. 3 of those years were spent on the National Gallery. I was assigned to the team with another young architect, Jan Weymouth, to the design team. I was 30. Jan was maybe 28. Neither of us had done a building, and Im was asking us to help him work on this project. I think Jan was maybe doing something for a couple weeks, so Im gave me his diagram. The famous diagram of the major triangle and the minor triangle, the major triangle being isosceles, bisected, half of it went out and became the study center. I took the diagram and I looked at it for 2-3 weeks and went back to Im and I said, Im, I think this diagram is going to result in compromise. Well, he looked at me and he said, no compromise. And I was dismissed. Well, I spent the next 3 years, we all spent the next 3 years in making that diagram into the building that it is today, and that diagram held almost absolutely. Only one point was a deviance with the original diagram, and that was actually the dimension of the study center. Im was determined to keep that study center at half the size of the major triangle. It even got to the point where we simply couldn't get the program into it. And we were around on a Saturday afternoon, and Im had about 4 or 5 of us gathered around, and we were frustrated. And he said, go get Corb's book from my office. Well, Corb's book was entitled Creation is a Patient Search, right? Well, someone went and got it, and he brought it in to him, and he was thumbing through it, and he just couldn't find La Tourette. And he wanted to show us that example of this volume that projects out from the volume below. Well, some guy in the group said, yes, I am. Creation is a patient search. Well, I think what I want to tell you, what I took away from working in that office, the first thing I took away, I learned very early. I think I'd been there about 2 weeks. And the chemistry building at MIT had just gone out to bid. As in the case of most of the projects at that time, there'd be an office pool as to how the bid would turn out. And so a whole list of people put down their estimates of what it would ultimately be. Harry Cobb walked by, and he saw that several of the people that had worked on the project were actually saying that the bid would be higher than the budget. He was so extraordinarily offended that somebody could be working on that project for a length of time and actually feel that the project was not to come in within the budget. That was a tremendous lesson for me. The second lesson was that, and everybody talks about this, the enormous professionalism of the office. Whether it was concrete, whether it was stone, whether it was glass, everything was dealt with in a way to understand all of its potential. But then finally, for me, the most important thing was actually working for Im himself. He did not suffocate us. He encouraged us. He encouraged us to, in fact, to find means of exploring and filling out that diagram that became the essence of the partie of that project. I remember Jan and I had worked on it for a while, and Carter Brown had talked about the concept that no museum visit should really be more than 10,000 square feet. That's quite an unusual statement, coming particularly from Carter Brown, but it did trigger the idea of the concept of the individual houses. And from then, the project was able to move forward. So the manner in which Im worked with a young designer, with young people, was for me the model upon which my career was based. Gene Cohn recruited me after about a few years. I joined Gene in another organization, and then we became partners. The model of McKim, Mead, and White is perhaps not terribly dissimilar from the model of Cohn, Pedersen, Fox. Shelley Fox, I've often made the analogy of a sailboat. Shelley Fox was our keel. Gene Cohen was probably at the tiller. And I guess by default, I'm the sails. But our objective was to ultimately, let's see, the green one, is that right?
Is that the big one? There we go.
The objective was first to survive. We started in 1976. It was the worst recession in architectural history, practically. Just survival was crucial. But the first building that enabled us to get off the ground was the one on the left, 333 Wacker Drive in Chicago. But what it also did was to reveal to us that one of the possibilities for a future exploration of our career that could be the anchor of all of our intentions was the exploration of the, one might call the fundamental building block of the city, which is a commercial high-rise office building, speculative office building. From that, it led us into a global practice in Shanghai, and then now to perhaps our most demanding project at Hudson Yards. The nature of our practice has largely transformed as a result primarily of globalism. The opportunity to be able to send those emissaries from our office out to Asia was an opportunity for them and for us, where they were able to establish their own identities as well as our identity. I feel, as a partner in the office, that my responsibility is to be able to grow future leaders of our firm, and that has been the model that we've always practiced by. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We are also very delighted to have with us Sandi Pei. Sandi Pei is the founding partner of Pei Partnership Architects, a firm he established with his brother, Didi, after working at Im Pei Partners from 1976 until 1992. Since then, he has directed the design of over 5 million square meters of building and large-scale urban development projects in the United States, Mexico, China, Indonesia, and Singapore. Some of his firm's notable projects include the Chinese Embassy in Washington, D.C., the Suzhou Museum, Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center, and the Centenary Luxury Condominium Building in New York City. The firm has designed projects for BMW, Bank of China, China Institute, the Creative Arts Agency, Macau Foundation, the Mandarin Oriental Hotel Group, and MIT, among others. He serves on Christie's advisory board and is vice president of the International Council of the Museum of Modern Art. And again, Sandi graduated from the GSD in 1976. His firm is 6 principals, including co-founders, of course, Didi and Sandi Pei, and they're headquartered in New York City. Please welcome Sandi.
Thank you very much. Sorry. I wanted just to give you a little bit of background about our firm. As you may know, I worked for my father from 1976 until 1992, when my brother and I decided to move out at the time when my father announced that he was going to formally retire from the firm. He was separating from Pei Cobb and Fried in 1992, although as we all know, for many years afterwards continued to practice and do some of the his most important projects, of which several my firm had the opportunity to help to develop construction documents, including some work on the Doha Museum and the Suzhou Museum, for which my father is properly credited. The reason why in 1992 we decided to move out was really, it was twofold. Number one, my father, when he left that firm, left the practice, gave the firm an opportunity to allow his partners, Harry Cobb, Jim Fried, to emerge in a way without the challenge of having the nepotism of a family coming in. That was one of the important reasons why we felt it was good to go out. And of course, it was an opportunity for my brother and myself to try to establish our own wings, if you will, to get out and to see what we could do. Now, we tried to follow the model of the firm in some ways, but of course we could not. And that's part of what the discussion this evening should be about. We, unlike my father, when he started Im Pei and Associates, had a fairly large practice already based on the web and app, the number of people who are already working there, as Yvonne had mentioned. He had 75 to 100 people there. In addition, he had a lot of expertise, what we call resources, deep resources, people who were knowledgeable of concrete, of glass, technology, and even hardware, interior design. And because they were doing a lot of urban renewal, they had planners as well. When you start a young practice, as we did from scratch, it was very, very difficult. So we face that kind of challenge. And we have actually, while we have tried to maintain this notion of an atelier, our firm is very small, but we still, what we lack is the size, the depth, the resources. That really is the engine of what was the Pei, Cobb, and Fried practice. Now, I don't really want to talk too much more. I'm just going to show you a couple, the one slide that Yvonne show three, I show one. So we average out. And I will just leave that up because these are just a couple of the projects that the one on the left is a museum. It's a science center that we did. I finished in about 4 or 5 years ago in Macau, China. And the other one is a project I'm currently working on also in Asia, which will be a hotel resident as well as service apartments, residential and retail. This describes the characteristics of the work that we are doing, although we are in many different sectors. We're doing a lot of different kinds of work, healthcare, museums, theaters, and so forth. So we have a fairly broad variety. But I think that the important thing is for me not to talk more about these kind of things, but for us to have this discussion that Grace and Yvonne primarily have really already begun to introduce, and I think it's really the core of tonight's discussion. So I want to get that going. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandi. Then finally, we are delighted to have Shohei Shigematsu. Shohei is a partner at OMA and the director of the New York office. Sho has completed a number of cultural projects, including Milstein Hall for Cornell University, the extension for the Quebec National Art Museum, Faina Forum in Miami Beach, and the Costume Institute exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He is currently designing an extension to the Albert Knox Art Gallery and a new campus for Facebook. And yesterday, the New York Times announced that OMA will design the addition to the new museum. OMA is led by 9 partners with offices in 3 cities. Please welcome Shohei.
Thank you. It's a very great honor to be part of this discussion, and of course I feel overwhelmed listening to the great history of those respected firms. And maybe in my case it's a little bit different. Also, OMA is a kind of unique, maybe living organization that is keep evolving. Not to say that the other firms are not also not evolving, but Basically, I was also very glad to be part of this conference because it's very relevant for OMA to discuss how we're going to evolve from now on. As you know, OMA was a collective group in the beginning, and Rem was, as you know, a student of Elia Zengelis at AA school. So the starting point was already a collective firm, although, of course, the size was kind of small. But soon after Rem stood up as a kind of leading figure, as you know, it started to become an incubator for younger, successful architects, as it's noted in the center. So unfortunately, I'm in the position that I have to compete with a bunch of ex-OMA people now. And Rem is sincerely also annoyed by that fact. I can tell you that. But so, as I said, it became an incubator, I think. And as you know, it created a lot of spin-offs. But now, maybe the evolution is that we started to finally retain talents within the firm. And of course, after a lot of good people had left, the remaining is maybe not great architects, but we somehow actually started to really form a partnership, which is similar to the American model of partnership. But we didn't always, of course, know how to run partnership. And the problem is that each partner had a relationship to Rem. Not like the partners were friends. So there's a kind of, the starting point is already so dysfunctional. But we actually tried for past 10 years since the partnership was formed to create a coherence, create a kind of almost like a shrink session to really kind of spill out what we think of each other. But we decided that that will not be very productive. So we decided that, okay, every partner should cultivate your own project and deliver the project. That's the model that we're taking now. So as you might know, so the 9 partners, they're trying to do their own work, which creates a kind of multifaceted, diverse range of work, but also in a way, maybe pushing the idea of, OMA's ethos, which was always never deliver a same, language or be very specific about to the given condition. And what helped to do that, was maybe having multiple offices. We tried, as Yvonne said, we actually experimented to have even more offices. Right now, we closed Dubai office, so we only have 3. But at one moment, we had Beijing and even other places. But we started to feel that's not so productive. So right now, the main offices are in New York and Rotterdam and Hong Kong. Remaining to deal with China and Asian market. But I took the New York office as an opportunity to really push the OMA's identity to the next generation, because by the time I arrived to US, there was, of course, OMA's image was single-handedly basically given to Rem. But I felt the opportunity to really rebrand, so to speak, OMA's identity to a much more younger and maybe easy to deal with entity, and undo the kind of an effect that Rem had in the United States. And I think that was a great opportunity to actually push the identity of OMA as a whole, which I guess we can talk about it later. And this is a range of work, as everyone was trying to say. Also, we try to keep it very diverse, cultural. I had the opportunity to actually deal with Johnson Art Museum in Cornell which is part of the master plan I made with Moisen, and the architecture school extension was part of it. So we do cultural buildings, and then we do a lot of exhibition designs and collaboration with artists such as Taryn Simon, Saigo Chan, and Kanye West. We do also a lot of big urban planning, and I think the Facebook new campus is also one of the first attempts that the tech company is going to make a mixed-use new district, and then we're developing the third-generation office headquarters for them in Menlo Park. But we also do a lot of public space, which, of course, in the gene of OMA, as Rem was also a very good urban, is a great urban thinker. This is a very important part of our practice. And lastly, I think this is somehow related to how the organization can evolve, is always to cultivate the interest that you have beyond the commissions. So we always have this kind of AMO, a thinking part of the office that drives and basically formalize our interests. This is a research I had the opportunity to do here at GSD called Alimentary Design, to look at the food production in the urban condition. And I had done a study about the perennials, basically art events at Columbia University, and then basically those evolved into a project, luckily, but somehow that was a very important part of the vehicle of OMA, and currently also that basically style of thinking, or think before design mentality is a core part of the OMA. So maybe this was a snapshot of how OMA is maybe evolving, which still I don't know where it goes. And this is a snapshot of what we're doing at OMA New York. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite our panelists, we may turn the lights up a bit and then invite our panelists to join us here in the front, and we'll just open it up to conversation. So. Or are they on? Are they on? Oh, they're on. Okay. Thank you all. That was, first of all, a wonderful introduction to all of your firms, and to just get a sense of the diversity here. It's very impressive and really interesting to have. I'm going to ask you a few questions, but I really do want to open it up as quickly as we can to the audience, because I'm sure that they also have a number of questions. Bill, I'm struck by the fact that you had said very specifically that one of your goals is to grow successors. And I think that that's a very interesting comment that you make. And of course, among all of you, you have, let's say, one of the largest numbers of principals in the practice right now. And so could you talk a little bit about how you are doing that? Of course, you're also spread over many different offices. And it seems to me like the other three are either in a single office or trying to retain somehow, keep tight to maybe 3 offices. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
One of the fundamental decisions that we made, I should say it evolved, that the firm was going to perpetuate itself. And when you have that particular perspective, a whole series of things have to come into play. Now, people that have been with our firm, particularly in design, for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, are now taking leading positions in it. Jean and I and Shelley all felt that for people that have devoted a length of time to us and have given us so much, we have a responsibility to them to be able to enable them to realize their professional aspirations within our own organization, not going elsewhere. And so this has led to the desire, one, to perpetuate our culture, which we talk a lot about, and it probably is somewhat mythological, but we talk a lot about it. But the desire to be able to work with somebody for a period of time to the point where they're capable of working independently is our objective. And then being able to enable them to have the opportunities once they're in that position is our challenge. So that is how the firm has grown to 600 people now, 25 partners in multiple locations around the world. But everybody in those positions has started with us and has grown with us.
That is interesting, because it sounds to me, Sandi, if I might turn to you, in your practice, you're kind of starting phoenix rising from the ashes, like making this brand new thing, and in your case, you are keeping it tight. And how do you see your practice growing, or when you think forward the trajectory of this, more principles, less? How do you think about it, especially in light of the fact that your father has formed a kind of alumni society of
our model,
architects?
We have a model. We try to follow, to some extent, the model of my father's practice. But as I said earlier, it's really more of a micro model, because when you have fewer resources and a smaller staff, we have to find a way to enjoy the environment that a small practice really gives satisfaction, both to me as an owner, a principal partner, but also those who are working with us. We have, as I said, around 32 people, including administration, in the firm, and each one of the design staff is very involved in our projects all the way through. So we operate the firm very much like an atelier, where the staff will work on one project all the way from the beginning all the way through. Of course, sometimes we don't have the privilege of being able to take a project all the way beyond design development. Most of our projects go through design development, but our staff does not go onto other projects. We keep them onto the same project. That's one way that we try to bring into the firm, develop amongst the staff and the talent to really emerge. And as they do, they are given more responsibility. Now, it's very difficult. The only way that we've been able to imagine growing is by splitting up and moving into other territories. Of course, we've been asked many times if we open an office in Hong Kong or in Shanghai, Singapore, or someplace, or even elsewhere in the United States, we could be able to get more work. But because we like to maintain control, we have not done that, and we want to maintain the quality of the work that we do. We want to make sure that as a group practice that we have the kind of oversight with the work that we are doing. So I don't think that in the current environment our practice is going to grow very much more. I think we're going to stay about where we are. Our work is very global, but we enjoy the fact that we can get very good work, but we don't need to have a lot of projects.
That's again a very different strategy. And Yvonne, you had mentioned that now the practice is 8 partners, and you're organized again vertically, so that you're essentially running your own studios. And how do you imagine, is that the model moving forward? I'm really interested in this question of at what point do multiple partners, I guess it's in a sense it's also a question for Bill, at what point do multiple partners produce such diffusion around a mission so as to flatten the mission, and how do we keep it alive? And it seems to me, so I'm questioning in a way, do you think there'll be more than 8 partners, and in this context, and how do you make the environment continue to thrive?
We've always had no more than 6 to 8, and that's a comfortable place. We always used to joke and say, just enough to get around a table and have lunch. And
That's good.
It's very collegial, and we have this daily lunch where it's a drop-in basis. So that's the way we like to keep the firm instead of being very corporate.
Right, and you can do that because you're in one office.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It is vertical, and it's unlike some other practices. It is always, you try to start on a project from beginning to end, and you could be going into interiors. I mean, so I think that is good for all our staff to be doing that. And I think with that issue you were asking before about a little bit about secession, about how firms deal with that, and I think we have done that 3 times, and it's been, like, if I really dissected it, it's like every 10 years. So it's really important in any of these firms to think about empowering the level of the people you think are important to you. The people who represent you, you empower them, you give them the credit due so that they are ready. It's always about, people don't, some firms bring in rainmakers, and we've never done that. And you have to nurture from within. And you have to time it, you have to discuss very difficult things, and we try to do that, maybe not so well, but we attempt to look beyond a little bit. And Harry has actually, guided us through all of that. He's been very good about that.
So in that case, it's quite consciously enacted. Yeah.
You have to be, actually.
Yeah.
It's essential.
And Shohei, I think that it's quite interesting that you are now being asked to differentiate yourself somehow from OMA, and I think it would be helpful for the audience to understand how much design independence occurs within the practices your partners. How are you maintaining that, or are you do you check in with REM? These are some questions that we're quite curious about.
First of all, we have 9 partners, so we have to get rid of one to be on comfortable size. I should have known that magic number. But yeah, the independence. I think it's naturally grown, and geographically, basically, it started from basically you can't run a project, if REM can't. If REM has to attend every single meeting or every single important meeting. So it started as a default, but somehow the geographical split, the role of outpost somehow enable us to experiment the fact that REM is no longer involved, which was a big challenge for business perspective, because we might lose a project because he's not involved if you announce that from the beginning, but we do now. And then somehow New York office, for example, 90% of the project is basically client agrees that or Jason Long, who is the GSD alumni, is leading the project without REM. So from the procurement to delivery to design to develop and to delivery, we are quite independent. And that's what is happening now using that model. Even in Rotterdam. In Rotterdam, there are 7 partners, but it's like a different studios now. And unfortunately, the collaboration is not so much happening, but we think that's a healthier development.
So please go ahead. Yeah.
I don't think I explained the structure of our firm very well. Gene Cohn has an enormous capacity for creating relationships. And it's his human nature to want to extend himself. Shelley Fox and myself were somewhat introverted. The three of us absolutely had to have Chien to be able to survive. That dynamic of having someone wanting to push more, working with someone that does not want to push as much and wants to hold things in and control things, that is the dynamic that really created our office. When globalism came about, and as you say, you need to have someone who can represent the office, it gave an opportunity for two individuals specifically to really take advantage of this. They've been with us for maybe 10 years, Paul Katz and Jamie von Klemperer. Both of them extraordinarily entrepreneurial individuals, extraordinarily capable from every perspective. Not like me, not like Shelley Fox, and maybe not like Chien either. They, each one of them, could do it all. And that was a tremendous tipping point for us as we then moved into Asia and started to establish offices elsewhere throughout the world. Now, it's a risky business because to grant that sort of autonomy is a challenge to the corporate, not the corporate, but the cultural identity of something that's been fostered for 25 years. But to me, the dynamic of that challenge is really the essence of the energy of the organization, the energy of our sharing together forces us to, in fact, have to go way outside our own comfort zone to be able to allow each of us to fulfill their aspirations. And so maybe we find ourselves somewhere in the middle ground, certainly not as diverse as Shohei, but at the same time, remarkably diverse. Ironically now, Jamie, as a result of the tragedy of Paul's death, Jamie had to assume the responsibility of this massive organization. We have now, for the first time, someone that one can call almost an Im Pei. He's a person that can do it all. And this energy that he is introducing into the office now is changing the culture, changing the dynamic of it. But what gives me the greatest satisfaction is it appears as if the work is getting better. And that, is the ultimate aspiration of any of us.
It seems like we're at this juncture today where we see, even RIBA put out a report a couple of years ago that stated that, well, basically the middle-sized firms, they're going to die away, and what we're going to have is either the large corporate firms at one end of the extreme, or we're going to have the boutique firms who will simply collaborate with the construction document firms of the world. So we'll have this kind of pushing to the extremes, and everything will be out of the middle. Partly because through the boutique firms, all you get is the authorial project, you get the intellectual project. That's what they do. And with the big firms, you get the full service, all engineers and consultants under one roof. Everything from A to Z is handled in that 2,000 or 4,000 person firm. And so then what happens to the firms, like actually all four of yours in some similar ways? How would you differentiate yourself? As you imagine yourself moving forward, how will you continue to make the relevant work that you're interested in producing, if we are in fact moving in these very in these two divergent ways? Uh-oh, not a good moderator.
No. You were looking at me, Grace?
Oh, and all four of you.
Sorry.
Please, we should also feel free to cut in on one another, because this is a conversation, so please.
No, I didn't know you were asking me, but I would say that for me, if I am not going to derive the satisfaction of being an architect who doing work to what I believe is the necessary standard of quality and rigor. If I am not going to get that, I don't care whether I have a small office or a large. I'm not going to continue to practice that. I will no longer derive the kind of reward and satisfaction that I believe not only I seek as a professional, but as I really demand of myself. And I think that is our role to seek to do the very, very best work that we can. And there are plenty of architects who are willing to do maybe different kinds of aspirations, but given my own tradition or the legacy, I cannot go that way. So I'm very happy, as I said earlier, to have a small practice, provided that the work that I do, the commissions that I receive, allow me to seek and achieve the kind of quality that is important. So it's not a matter of size. It's really a matter of what the quality is we do.
There's so much, I think, maybe mythology associated with how one needs to control things to be able to produce quality. I am, after having seen your images, clearly there are other models for the architectural practice. They're fraught with dangers, but the energy that is generated just by the friction of the participants sometimes creates a dynamic that is extraordinary. Dealing with the building type that, from a philosophical perspective, we see as important. The appalling ugliness of our cities is largely generated by the building type that we focus on. And we want to find a way of, taking it a little step further. Now, Rem Koolhaas said that Rockefeller Center was a masterpiece without a genius. And that's our model. There are not very many geniuses around. You may have one, but we can count the number on the palm of our hand. For me, to create an office where you can do work of a high quality with people that come from the GSD or average people like the rest of us here, and you create a dynamic that enables you to do good work. I feel personally that the structure of our firm is far greater in terms of what we do as a dynamic than any of the buildings we've ever created. But I'm totally convinced that the structure of the firm has created a dynamic that enables it to achieve more in the future rather than less. But we're never going to be doing the ornaments of the city. We're never going to be doing the museums. We're never going to be doing that. We're doing the normative buildings of the city. We pride ourselves on doing the normative buildings of the city. And the juxtaposition between commercial reality and architectural form has been totally responsible for the aesthetic that we've generated.
Yeah, I think when you mention mega firms, indeed, I think that issue of type, scale, and geography is scale, yes. If you have a mega firm, they will get the mega projects. I mean, there's no competition here, and I don't think necessarily that any one of us wants to go do that. Type, yes, a little bit, because mega firms will be specializing in particular types where might close the door on those, like research buildings or hospitals and things of that kind that are highly technical and specialized, maybe that. But I think, in a way, technology is saving us, in a way, in the last, say, 20 years, because we are able to do more with less people. We are able to work more globally, thanks to AutoCAD, thanks to email, thanks to Rhino, Grasshopper, Revit, and GoToMeeting. you can go very far and you can do a lot of things and derive a great deal of satisfaction with what we can do ourselves. And I think it's about satisfaction, getting the projects that you really want and not trying to get all of it.
I think as I said, in the end, the cultivation of the architecture practice as a whole, basically not to compete too much, but to really think of the future of the practice, is to collectively think that is very important. Otherwise, probably the architecture profession itself might be in a danger at some point, because when I talk to like Ray Kurzweil and all these kind of future tellers, they of course predict like the 3D printers to be replacing the contractors, and then also open source basically diminishes the intellectual properties and so on. So I think it's important to continue cultivating the domain for architectural expertise. That's why for us, like AMO, type of applying architectural thinking to non-architectural conditions is probably important for our generation, and also really trying to capture the change by observing the society in depth, so that we can actually invent a new typology of architecture, for example, so that we don't stick to existing typological boundaries, but we ourselves, like entrepreneurship, generate our own business and domain. I think that's a kind of mentality that is maybe lacking at the moment in the architecture firms.
That's very interesting. That's interesting springboard. Now, I know that there are those of you who wish to ask some questions, and that we can open it up. I can ask all the questions tonight. I'm very excited about this subject matter, but please.
Hi, thank you for a great talk. I'm curious to know what role New York City has played in the legacy of your practices, having that as like a strong grounding and a strong anchor in your practice.
That's a great question. Like in Holland, as you know, there are many great firms in Rotterdam, where it was one of the only cities that was heavily bombed by Germans, so everything was modernized. So there are a lot of aspiration and inspiration from the city. So I think there's something, what you said, something about the city's energy and the history of this great practice that still spawn great ideas and great organizations. But I don't know, in my case, I just picked New York because it was open. But at that moment also, when everyone was looking at China and Middle East as a new market, I was a little bit tired of chasing those big markets. And then luckily at that time, America was not in the OMA's map. So I was kind of comfortably developing myself in the city. But now it's, quite energetic, booming again. It's a tough city to run a practice, I think.
Well, New York actually, for most of our career, was sort of a backwater from an architectural perspective. I think a lot of that changed during the Bloomberg administration. There was a desire to be able to bring others to New York. I think that has created an energy that is tremendously welcome, ironically. Competition is always good. Competition always improves the situation. Let me just tell you a little bit about the Hudson Yards evolution. Hudson Yards is being built in two phases, one on the east, which is pretty much underway now, and one on the west. Stephen Ross, who is the developer and the head of Related, is controlling this entire project. It's a massive project. He now has become enamored of being able to bring in divergent voices. The desire to create a Rockefeller Center where there's a unity of expression is not at all an interest. The interest is in the heterogeneity and the creation of unique specific identities. This has positive things and negative things associated with it. But I think it's very clear that this is if one might call it an emerging trend. There's no question about the fact that Thomas Heatherwick, who's designed the vessel in the center of Hudson Yards, Stephen he's mesmerized by it. And I think, frankly, most people will be. It's an extraordinary thing. Elizabeth Diller's culture shed is equally mesmerizing. And now for the selection of the architects for the westerly development, Stephen, we've done 3 buildings there, and we're not going to get another shot at it. He asked me, who do you think I should select? And he very much wants to be able to bring in individuals that have an identity throughout the world. And this is going to be, I think, for New York architecture, something that is a tremendous infusion of energy. And I'm excited about it. And so I think that, the concept of restraining competition, the concept of holding things close, it doesn't exist anymore. And to be able to use it as a springboard for something that enables you to do something you never thought you would do is pretty exciting.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
I was wanting to talk about Im Pei as one of the great American architects of the last 60, 70 years, and also an immigrant. And someone who from the get-go, his architecture has been seen as profoundly American. And what do we have to say about that?
Well, I'd like to answer a little bit, very, very briefly. One thing that's quite interesting about the time in which Im Pei came to the United States, I'm actually very familiar with that time because it's the same time period in which my father came to the United States, and actually very different, very early. I'm Korean by heritage, but it represents a very specific period in which when a student was coming to the United States, they were coming very specifically for scholarly endeavors with the intention to return. And that's quite different, I think, than the mass movement of immigration that you see of, particularly of East Asians coming in the 70s and 80s and 90s. It's very, very different. So I think that that's quite an, not thinking through this entirely, but I think that there is something about in all the books that I've been reading about Im, he was actually very, and maybe Sandi could speak to this a little bit more, but he was actually a bit melancholic the moment that he had to give up his citizenship and become a US citizen. Because I think he had always envisioned that he would return, but the China to which he was planning to return was not the China that he left. And I think that's very true for, again, many of East Asians. My father actually naturalized himself like 4 times, back and forth, because it was so difficult to imagine actually an immigration to the United States. And so I think it's quite a different time period. But actually, so I would love for Sandi to talk about that a little bit more, because he would be most intimate with that kind of knowledge. But also show what's interesting for you is that you are also a foreigner, in a sense, working in the States, which is not your country, Japan. So.
Well, of course, my father did intend to go back to China, but of course circumstances changed, and instead he stayed in the United States. Fortunately for him, I think that he would himself view himself as an American architect. Others may see other aspects of him through his work. In other words, the Asian influence coming in, his appreciation for landscape, for example, which is very much a part of his upbringing, I think is something which he brought in and very much characterized a lot of his work throughout his career. But I think that when he was here in the United States, he had immense opportunities, and I think that it was the kind of beginnings that he had working with the real estate developer William Zeckendorf was central to his emergence as an architect at a very young age, and then being able to carry that forward and develop it in a mature style once he established Im Pei and Associates in 1955 or 1960. I think that those early days, that opportunity to work, surprisingly, you may say, for a developer who you have to think in those days, even today, was really looked down at dismissively, but for him was a key ingredient, allowed him to develop himself as an architect.
I worked in Europe for 10 years and China and now in the US, so I really think the US is one of the most open place, as you said too, and I never really feel, strangely enough, that I'm really outsider. I think it's a great place to practice in that way. But the funny thing is that now I work in Japan for Mori Building, and I go back there every like 6 weeks. And I thought of opening a Japanese office, but I decided not to because, once as a Japanese you go back to Japan, then you're now part of another, all the Japanese that are there, and I can't really distinguish myself anymore. And no, they really treat you like that. Oh, once you have your office here, your fee is Japanese, everything has to be Japanese way. But now I fit in a kind of niche where I speak Japanese, but in a kind of foreign breath. So somehow it's working out quite well. So.
One of the things that I think that the huge risk that Im took associating with William Zeckendorf at the beginning of his career. I mean, when you think about it in retrospect, it is extraordinary. And we talk about leaps of type in terms of a practice. I mean, I don't think anybody has ever done that before. And then to have survived it, and in a relatively short period of time, bring about an architectural language which is extraordinary.
Well, I do think that seems to be characteristic of his personality, so curious and not willing to abide by, let's say, a particular kind of norm that I think is very adventurous. Others, please.
I had a question for Bill and Sandi and Yvonne. Each of you were understandably deferential and very respectful about what you learned from Pei and partnerships and the extent to which it was a model for your respective firms. But I wonder if you could speak to the ways that you may have challenged or rejected the systems or the ways of working that were evident within the practice that you then incorporated into your own practices.
Told you would get this.
I can speak to that because there was no place for me to go. The hierarchy was stacked. There was no way of breaking into that hierarchy, and I was anxious to do something. And so I, had an opportunity to design a major project on my own, and I took it. And but fundamentally, our structure has been designed in response to the structure that, frankly, I confronted in the Pei organization. So that, the fluidity with which, it's so delicate, the creation of an organism that can grow and can actually continue to flourish is really, more than anything, an amazing thing to deal with. So everyone does it differently, and there is no right way to do it, and you've seen so many different ways. But for me, I just had to be free of it.
I don't know what to say.
Me neither.
Oh. I can only reflect on what I don't have. I mean, I think that what is so remarkable about that practice, that firm, which I would say is very difficult to repeat, is the depth of and resources of the firm, number one, which it had because it emerged out of William Zeckendorf's office, 100 people at the beginning of his firm. And the support, the sponsorship that my father gave to his partners, to really allow themselves to realize their potential, their ambitions. I think that if you look at the work of the firm in the early days, or all through the 70s and 80s, you can see very, very high quality work, but very different, divergent results from individual partners. If you look at the Hancock building and you compare it to the Bank of China, you see one is very much driven by form, the other one is much more involved in structure. I mean, I'm talking about being able to have a practice where you can embrace the differences amongst the partners. You can really bring in a very collegial way. I think the practice was very, very good because all the partners had a great deal of trust and respect for each other. They allowed each other to develop their own idiom, their own language, and to produce really very fine works of art, which a large practice, which it was a fairly large, 150 people maybe at that time, was able to do work which I think is very enduring, very significant. From the Holocaust Museum, which Jim Freed did, to Portland Museum, which Harry did, and a number, I can really think of at least a dozen projects that were done by his partners that I think shows the openness and the trust and collegiality that produces fine architecture. I think we had and then the people in the firm who were all dedicated. Again, I'm talking about resources and the depth of what the firm offered in order to produce that kind of work consistently. I wish that I had that depth in my own practice. I would like to do it, but I don't have that, and I think I miss it. But I remember it. It really, in many ways, guides me in the way I conduct myself amongst my colleagues, my principals. I want them also to have that, be able to emerge. But anyhow, that's just an aside. It's not really an answer to your question.
Sandi, I didn't mean to. I was there at a very specific point in time. I was there from 1967 to 1971. There was no real understanding of how one would get from point A to point B in terms of one's aspirations. Fundamental to our structure is a sort of an implicit understanding of how to get from point A to the furthest point you want to go if you have the determination and the talent. There's no guarantee in any of it. But there is enough precedent set for people that have made it from that point to that point. So when one comes into the practice, you pretty much can understand it, how to get there if you really want to. And so that's what was lacking at that particular point in history for me. There was no way that I could understand how to get past the point I was at.
A couple of things. First of all, actually, Grace, thanks to you for doing such a wonderful job of sort of setting the scene and doing such a great intro. And really, thank you all also very much to all of our panelists. I think, in all honesty, this is like the beginning of a conversation, because it's great that it's revealed so many aspects, so many nuances about not only the work of IM, the practice, Pei Fried, but also how these discussions are really leading or opening up conversations about contemporary and sort of future practice, which I think, even in terms of some of the things that you've been saying, I've been sitting there thinking, well, it's true that, you know, from these firms, maybe, you know, Pedersen Fox is the largest, maybe, in terms of size. But in some ways, actually, they're the ones who are producing the most singular architecture, if I could put it like this, because you can go to China or go to Singapore or go to this place, and in some ways, the KPF high-rise buildings have become very recognizable, despite the openness and the freedom in a way that you're talking about. So it's actually interesting how the technical knowledge, the deep understanding of a particular typology can reach a certain level where the quality of that assumes its own kind of level of recognition in some way, and how the focus that Sandi keeps referring to about the knowledge. I mean, it's actually unfortunate that we don't have Mike Flynn with us, but I think it was very important that, for example, you have different kinds of expertise within the firm. That is what Sandi has been referring to, and then you can really end up with very different looking kinds of architecture within a smaller practice. And it's also great to see Bill, who I know is often very reticent when he's pushed to really come out and fight the cause of the silent, brilliant, creative architect who I've seen him in the office sort of do that. I was remiss at the beginning not to welcome Eric Chen, who has been our co-conspirator and the curator of architecture at M+, to say a few words. Obviously, the conversations tomorrow around the discussion of technology, about different, if you like, typologies of building types, and really the focus on issues of the public and power structures, which has been such an important part of also IM's views, are going to be the subject of these themes. But I'd just like to give the final word to Eric to, well, he was going to welcome you, but now maybe he can sing you a lullaby and send you towards dinner. So Eric, please come and say a few words, please.
Thanks, Mose. And I can hear everyone's stomachs grumbling, so I'll make this very mercifully short. I think we're off to a really great start. I mean, when we started organizing this with Mose and Seng here, it was clear that GSD had a particular interest in looking at Pei via the lens of architectural practice. And I think very quickly we've seen how Pei and Pei Fried so fluidly figures into a broader discussion about the nature of practice, the sort of continuity or discontinuity, the authorial voice, the relationship between the persona of the architect and the collaborative nature of architecture, or in OMA's case, perhaps the lack of collaboration due to too many personas. But we're just scratching the surface here. As Mosen said, there's been very little scholarship on Pei. We're sort of very rapidly trying to play catch up with these two symposia. If you can just indulge me for maybe one more minute, I'd like to say a few words about why we, meaning M+, are so interested in this. For those of you who might not know, M+ is a new museum for visual culture, 20th and 21st century art, design, and architecture and moving image. It's under construction in Hong Kong. We have a Herzog and de Meuron building opening in 2 years, God willing. And part of our aim, or a big part of our aim, is to sort of tell the lesser-known narratives of these disciplines in our region, but also revisit global, more well-worn global narratives from the vantage point of where we're situated. And sometimes that's just a matter of shifting emphasis. Other times it's maybe slightly more contentiously a matter of reinterpretation. But either way, Pei is there are few greater figures for us to be looking at than Pei. So we're really excited to be doing these 2 symposia. First here at GSD, which we've designed to maybe have a little bit more of an East Coast American perspective, and then in Hong Kong, where there'll be a bit more focus on Pei's, not only his work in Asia, but also his impact in Asia. And I think through these sort of different perspectives and vantage points, we hope to kind of help develop a fuller picture of Pei, who, as Mosen alluded earlier, we have bigger plans for. So on that note, maybe I'll just end, because I know many of you are probably disappointed, as we all are, that Harry Cobb is not here. But tomorrow, Janet Strong will be talking about concrete and Pei in the morning session, which begins, I believe, well, there's breakfast at 8:30 and then 9:30, right? So I think that's it, and we look forward to more. Thank you.
Thank you all again. Really, also thank you for members of the Alumni Council and some of those wonderful people who are here for reunion. Really, thanks for being here. And please make sure that you join us. And once again, thanks to this incredible panelist and to everybody else who's speaking up.